I went to a village of native Brazilians, and I explained what I think is settler colonialism. They got it quicker than my students in Mexico. They understood exactly what I was talking about. They had no problem. And then, but what they didn't know, that settler colonialism also exists in Palestine. And they suddenly saw the connection. And it was important for them to see the connection in a place like Brazil. So I think in connection like this, they add their own struggle for native indigenous people in Brazil with pressure on the Brazilian government to do more for Palestine. These kinds of connections are very important. It took us time to understand it. You know, even African Americans in the United States, you would have thought are natural allies of the Palestinians, were not natural allies of the Palestinians because of the religious environment that so many African Americans grew in. And, you know, even Martin Luther King would talk about the Israelis as the minority, as the slaves, as the people oppressed. Now it's not like this anymore. There is an understanding, you know. People in Gaza demonstrated when the police in Ferguson attacked the African American demonstrators with Israeli weapons and Israeli know-how how to disperse demonstrations. And these connections become very, very important in the minds of people. Because after all, we will need a global alliance. Think about the fact, and with this I will end, that what we call today the United Nations, what we call today international institutions, some of them are still not in the United States, and people are not even allowed to go there. We need the global South to take over some of these institutions. High time to move the United Nations to Kenya. People used to say, you know, if only the United States would be replaced by other international empires or powerful countries, the reality would immediately change on the ground. And here we have Russia and China abstaining from rejecting a plan that has nothing to do with peace, that actually abuses the term peace, and is actually meant to normalize the annexation of half of the Gaza Strip to Israel and the continued ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians from Gaza in a different way than it was done in the last 2 years. So the Palestinians are facing through this resolution the global reality they were facing long before. Nothing anything new for them in the fact that the international law that is supposed to defend them, that has supposed to defend them for years, has never defended them. Never defended them. Sometimes it used the right rhetoric, but it never defended them with action. So in a way, there's nothing new in it. It's just a warning for us, I think. Not so much, I think the national movement, the resistance, so on, will have to continue the way it is. It's an important message, I think, not for the Palestinian national movement. It's an important movement and message for us in international solidarity movement. We are entering a dangerous moment when people would say, oh, the genocide is over, the war is over, and we already saw it. We don't have to think about throwing Israel out of European football. We don't have to think about throwing Israel from Eurovision. We don't need to think about sanctions against Israel. This terrible thing that Israel did is behind us. As if you can put behind your genocide. You just have a start date and an end date to genocide, and nothing happens. If Europe ever treated genocides like that. So yeah, I think it's a warning for us that the international conversation is one that we have to challenge with our language, with our vocabulary, because the mainstream media and mainstream politics immediately would catch up on this. I will just say one small sentence. You know, every foreign ministry in Europe, especially in Western Europe, has a bizarre section. It's called the Middle East Peace Process. And that is people in Holland and Norway, and usually young civil servants who are part of a section that deals with something that does not exist. And that is so indicative to waste so much energy or something that isn't there. But it allows the shield of immunity to continue. Well, I think that, first of all, I'm not the only one. Each one of us who grew up in a conventional Zionist upbringing and changed our point of view went through different journeys. We didn't all go through the same path. In my case, it was a combination of few things. The fact that I decided to focus on history, I was very interested in history, so I was exposed to professional historical research to facts and evidence that contradicted my ideological indoctrination. I studied abroad, which also helps, sometimes to see from the outside things you cannot see from the inside. You can also meet Palestinians on different setup when you go abroad and you meet them inside Israel. And I suppose we all have something in our constitution that allows us to do this, or doesn't allow us to do this. I think the important thing is to focus not on me, but to focus on the next generation of Israelis and to see whether we are desperately right when we think that the younger generation there is not going to change. In fact, it's going to be a bit worse than the present generation. I hope this is not the right analysis, but if it is the right analysis, then there's an uneasiness in it that we have to ask again those with power, how are you going to deal with it? How are you going to deal with the genocidal state? This is a legal question, not just a moral and political. I do hope that I know that I'm not the only one. As I said, this I would end. Definitely outside of Israel, young Jews who were Zionists in huge numbers have been transforming their opinion, their position, and some of them became also very active in the international solidarity movement. There is a similar movement among some young Israeli Jews, but it's very modest in terms of numbers, but it's important that it exists for reconciliation in the future. It would be good to know that there were some Israeli Jews who were not taking part in the genocide, were objecting to the genocide, were even arrested for their objection. It's a healthy thing to be part. We will remember it in the future, I think, and will help us to get out into that. I talk about the beginning of an end, so it's a long process, and I see it, the very indicators of that long process, and not only they are there, I think they're even more visible when I wrote the book. For example, the implosion of the Israeli Jewish society from within is even more intensive. You can have a lot of weapons, you can have nuclear bombs, but if your society is embroiled in a civil war, that will not sustain your state. You can have a strong macroeconomy right now, but that means that if a war economy continues, you cannot deal with the social and economic problems of your society. And already people who are in Israel, and I go there as much as I can and I am allowed, can see that this macroeconomic success of Israel is not reflected in the lack of social services, the lack of economic help to those who need it, the widening gap between the rich and the poor. All these are processes that take time to mature, but are cracks in the foundation that would bring it down. I also talked about before isolation of Israel in the world, the isolation within the Jewish community. I'm also hopeful that things will change in the Arab world. I know that everybody says the attempt of 2011, 2012 is beyond us. History doesn't work like this. When you start a revolution, there is a counter-revolution. But there are millions of people in the Arab world who are angry and hungry, and they will make their voice be heard also in the Arab world. All this doesn't bode well for the Zionist project. And I do, as I said, and with this I will end, I think the most important thing is we look at the Palestinian political scene now and we see fragmentation, disunity, corruption in some cases. But we should think about the younger Palestinian generation with its unified consensus vision for the future, its education, its articulation. They will have their say. And we have to make sure that we give them the space to have the say. We don't do it enough with Palestinian voices. And they should be in the driving seat towards the future, because until now everybody was driving over them. But they should be the drivers for the future. And if this all is working, and it's possible to make it work, I think that we are indeed in the last chapter of Zionism as a political project. I don't know when, I'm not a prophet. I don't know if we will succeed in replacing it with something much better. I do hope so. Some decolonization created post-colonial regimes which were as bad as the colonialist regime, as we know. But we have hope. We have great hope that in a country such as Palestine, it would be possible to create at least a far better reality, if not an ideal one. You see, I think the language the political elite, the diplomats, the mainstream media uses is closely connected to the two-state solution. It's part of this idea that I pointed out historically already began with the Balfour Declaration. What matters is what the Jewish community, in what used to be Palestine now, in Israel, wants, and then you try to convince the Palestinians to accept it. And I think this goes together with the language that claims that this is a conflict between two national movements that have the same right to the homeland, and therefore we speak about partitioning it, a kind of a paradigm of parity, which is not really balanced. In any case, even in the best case scenario, the two-state solution, the Palestinians get 30% of their homeland, and even that is quite questionable whether this is what is meant by the two-state solution. So, yes, we have a language and solutions that reflect what I call global Israel. But we have the power, at least, first of all, to use a different language, especially, hopefully, in academia, and then maybe in the media, maybe in the education system, if we cannot directly go to the political elites or where political power lies. We have to disrupt this narrative. We have to challenge it. And in some places we did it. I mean, again, it depends how much you want to look at the empty part of the cup or the full one. I founded in the University of Exeter a Center for Palestine Studies, the first ever in the West that is part of the university. Now we have 10 such centers. And the idea was to have a safe space for academics, talk about one state, talk about decolonization, about apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. I think this is one way of showing how you challenge the language that allows the unjust reality to continue. You do it by saying, I'm not using the terms apartheid, colonization, ethnic cleansing because it's my opinion. I'm using it because that's the outcome of my research. Yeah. I'm saying it as an academic. And we should insist as academics, for instance, on our self-respect as experts. Because something very weird is happening when it comes to Palestine. When governments want to think of what should be the policy towards the Ukraine or Russia or other parts of the world, they go to their experts in academia, among others, to hear their opinion, to what we know, and so on. When they are asking themselves how to deal with Palestinian resistance, how to deal with the Palestinian national movement, how to deal with the liberation movement, how to deal with the calls for equality, not even decolonization, equality between the river and the sea, They go to the Israeli Secret Service for advice. You know, we have in Britain some of the best experts on Palestine. So we wrote a letter to the government. We said, before you formulate any position, whether it's on the Hamas, whether it's on the future of Palestine, as a British government, why don't you consult us? At least consult us. You don't have to accept. Okay? You may not want to take our advice. But the fact you don't even bother. The only people you're asking as the head of the anti-Zionist community, the Israeli Secret Service, and that's how you formulate your policy towards Israel and Palestine. This is the kind of challenges we can win, but we need courage because you pay a price sometimes from this kind of position. Now, academic courage can be an oxymoron, but we need to say to people that you are part of the solidarity movement with Palestinians. There's a price to be paid. It's not a walk in the park. But the Palestinians do not deserve our cowardice. They need our courage. I think there are two ways in which the financial support of the West work. One way it works will not be successful for Israel anymore. And that is, these are the direct grants. For instance, the United States used to pay Israel $3 billion a year. In the last 2 years, it gave Israel $40 billion. And this is the amount of money which Israel would demand for its plans. So that is going to weaken Israel in the sense that American isolationism, and maybe even European isolationism, might affect it. The problem is that Israel is now trying to increase its arms sales in order to have more money from that avenue. Now, what is terrible, and I had some conversation with workers in military industries in Britain, and that's a tough conversation to have because they don't want to lose their job. But I said to them, are you aware that, for example, that your cooperation with Israel is successful because the weapons that you produce in Britain are tested on Palestinians. And that's why everybody wants to buy them. They don't want to buy weapons that haven't been tested on human beings. So you are taking part in human tests on human beings with the worst kind of weapons. I don't know if it changes their position. The livelihood is very important for people, and I don't underestimate. What I'm trying to say that our struggle should not be just based on the hope, and this will be happen, I think will happen, of Israel becoming a liability rather than an asset. I think we should think about those industries that benefit from connection to Israel as workers, as people we should identify with their need to be alive in their own countries. But we have to work on it. We have to work on this vis-a-vis these industries as well. The industries themselves are not evil because they employ many, many people. The concept behind these industries is horrific, inhuman. And we have a whole global community that would identify with this struggle. I mean, this is not only used in Russia, it's used in Sudan, it's used in so many other parts of the world, it's used in crime in the cities. It's something that, looks huge on the one hand, but on the other hand, again, globalizes the struggle for Palestine. And without globalizing the struggle for Palestine, it would be very difficult to hasten what I call the beginning of the end and the end itself. Yeah. I think it's very difficult for me to know of every institution. When you say we, I don't know if you mean here in this university. So I think, generally speaking, we always have to remember that universities are two things. On the one hand, it's a business that has a management. On the other hand, it's a community of scholars. And we have very little hope for the university as a management to dare to go against the political elite. And then justify to themselves that if they do that, they undermine the viability of their own universities. So the question is, what is our dialogue with the university as a community of scholars? Are they willing to be part of institutions that are complicit, that are collaborative, and so on? That's one question we should ask them. Especially those who have positions that are not in danger, and with tenure or solid. But no less important, especially for our colleagues, who in one way or another relate to the situation in Palestine as academics. It's much more than freedom of expression. It is the necessity, as I pointed before, to say as professionals, we stand behind Palestine, not just ideologically or politically. So it's very good to examine in which department people teach about Palestine. Is it in the political science department about management of conflicts, conflict management? Is it part of the Jewish studies or Israel studies? Or is it part of the department that deals with colonialism and anti-colonialism? Maybe even a department that deals with genocide. These are very important changes that we happen somewhere, but have to be much more in order to create a future conversation. And that would, if I teach the Palestinian liberation movement in my university is anti-colonialist, immediately the Israeli embassy and the pro-Zionist lobby demands that I would be expelled from the university. So it depends which university you are. I am lucky. I have a university that defends my freedom to teach the Palestinian movement as anti-colonialist. Not because it's my opinion, because they said you are one of the world's experts on Palestinian history and one of the world's experts on colonialism and anti-colonialism. And that's very difficult to the lobby to challenge. If I was a mathematician that gives classes on anti-colonialism, they could say, he's an activist. We need to recruit these colleagues of us to do these things as well. Yeah. Well, you have to decide whether it's worth your energy. Some such conversation, there's a point in the conversation you understand it doesn't lead anywhere. But I do believe in the power of these conversations, but I do believe there's a limit. One of the most important, I don't know if these are necessarily Zionists, but people who are easily accepting the Zionist narrative, they don't have to be Zionists necessarily, because it's an easy narrative to accept, especially if you're a little bit Islamophobic, if we are all have a little bit of racism in us, and so on. So it's a very nice narrative, the civilized European fighting the barbarians in the Middle East and so on. These kind of people, I think, what I learned from my experience, the most important thing to insist with is on time and space, because you cannot answer this with a soundbite. People say to you, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. You say, you have time, I'll explain to you why it's not. You cannot give them a sentence like this, I know it from my experience in Israel, when we, once a year on Israeli Independence Day, we go, mostly Palestinians, but also a number of Jews, and visit one of the destroyed villages of 1914. And we visit the village, what's left of the village. We hear testimonies from people who came from the village, and put the Palestinian flag there and so on. Of course, the police wants to stop it and so on, but that's an important, it's called Masirat al-Nakba, it's called the Nakba March. Now, I'm quite recognizable, fortunately or unfortunately. So whenever I go back from such an event, and there is a red light in the junction, a typical Israeli car would stop next to me and would curse. And then would say, why are you doing this? And my answer was always, do you have time? I'll explain to you. But I cannot, it's going to be green light in a minute. I don't have to explain. I think this is the kind of thing. Now, I'm not over optimistic about that kind of thing, but I think it's right. it's important. It's important not to lose the conversation, the dialogue. People are not all born evil Zionists, even if they are Zionists, but it's a matter of prioritizing your energy, your resources. And one thing is very clear, I don't think Palestinians need to be engaged with this. It's our role as Jews, it's our role as anti-Zionist Jews to do the job there. We don't need the Palestinians are enough. Well, as I said, nowadays in the centers that I mentioned, there are dozens of young people, Palestinians, non-Palestinians, who devote their doctoral dissertations for research on these questions. As I showed in my new book, they are not only working on the past, they are answering practical questions that are not part of the so-called peace process, but should be part of the conversation about the future. For instance, we are supervising academic works that try to show how the right of return of the refugees will be implemented. We are supervising dissertations that show what can be the collective identity of Jews in a decolonized Palestine, what would be the future of the huge, not the small settlements, the huge settlements, which are like cities. These are serious academic works. So on that front, I'm less worried of research. I'm still worried, like everyone else, that we are unable to narrow the gap between what so many people feel about Palestine and the position of the governments. And that is not only true in democracies, it's true in the Arab world, it's true in part of the global South. There must be something there we can think of doing this. But I think research continues, or is in a better stage now than it was, when people like Edward Said and Ibrahim Abdullah were saying exactly what we say as historians about what happened in 1948, the American academia said you are propaganda, it's a propaganda, you're anti-Semitic, this is not serious academic work. Walid Khalidi, one of the biggest Palestinian historians in our time, was never offered a position in American university because he wrote about the Nakba. We are in a better position than we were. But as my friend Azmi Shara says, we have a much better quality of research, in fact, nowadays, but we have a far worse situation. So maybe we should have less of the quality, maybe the situation would be better. I'm joking. But this is really, there's no worry about this. The younger, I'm sure you know yourself, the younger Palestinian generation, especially the ones who live outside, but also inside Palestine, is very inquisitive, very knowledgeable, very articulate. The worry is not there. The worry is politics from above, its ability to continue to provide immunity to destruction. And how do we stop it? How do we change it? Thank you. We have two good models that unfortunately were not yet emulated by other countries. One is the Italian trade union, and what they did, they understood that the general trade union to begin with would not go along with the day of strike in support of Palestine, so they went to the smaller trade unions with a known tradition of supporting moral positions, and that influenced the whole trade union movement in Italy. And I think that's a very powerful message. Similar actions were done by some of the trade unions in Spain. We had talks with the trade unions in Britain. Unfortunately, they are unwilling to declare a day of strike in support of Palestine. But I think that's one thing. It's symbolic. It doesn't stop anything, but it's very, very important to say that unionized labor believes that it has a role in facing the injustice, undoubtedly. But I do think it's the other side of it is election. Sometimes we can't wait for convincing politicians that morally they are wrong, but maybe we can convince them that this is an electoral mistake. And in this respect, the United States, also I saw it in Britain, in some constituency, I don't know the situation, of course, in other parts of Europe, but I saw it also in France in the second round of election. It was possible, and that's the new thing that gives me hope, although it's not something I can take back home to Palestine to tell people tomorrow will be better, but it gives me hope. The fact that in the United States, in the Democratic Party, it's not very clear what the future candidate should do. Is it the traditional saying, I'm supporting Israel, and then of course you get the candidacy? Or will they have the problem of Kamala Harris for not showing enough attention to the Palestine cause? That's a very important development. In Britain, in some constituencies, people who put Palestine on their agenda, even as independent candidates, namely they didn't have support of the big parties, won the elections. And partly because Palestine was so important on their agenda. So we need to find these models. They start small, but they can become very, very powerful in the future. In fact, the first question I've been asked in many places, and it's not something I can really do, and I think the people themselves in the place to do it. I was in Amsterdam with my good friend Marian Barghouti, and she was asked that we were both on the panel, and she was asked, what can we in Holland do better than we didn't do until now? And she answered, I think, something reflected both our feelings. She said, Ilan and I are very tired. We don't know what we can do better in Holland. We don't know Holland. We don't know Amsterdam. We don't know the Dutch political system. Try to answer some of these questions yourself. You know the system, We can only encourage you that this is important, that maybe we can share some experience elsewhere, but I think it's really something that people in the country know better. But it comes back to the same point that I made before. If anyone is involved in solidarity with Palestine and thinks that this is something that will not come with a cost, they're wrong. Unfortunately, it comes with a cost. The question is, are we willing to pay the cost? Are we careful enough not stupidly to pay a cost that we shouldn't pay? Maybe if we are more vulnerable in our position, then maybe we should let someone who's less vulnerable do it. Students with not permanent visa should be careful. Of course, we should be pragmatic as well as committed, but we should not give up this. It's let's remember what people in Gaza are going through. If we think that we are facing, called anti-Semitic, I've been called self-hating Jew. Doesn't touch me anymore. I understand, I'm not underestimating the implications. I'm just saying that some of it should not touch us because inside we know we're doing the right thing. And if it's legislation, if it's arrest and so on, let's find the lawyers who will defend us. Let's find the unions who would stand behind us. Let's fight back. Let's fight back and escalate it, even if necessary, because that's what people in Palestine deserve that we should do for them. As for the historical question, on one hand you say Europe should focus on the Holocaust. It's not only the Holocaust, it's the genocide, the Second World War. So I'm not surprised. But what is important is to point, especially in Sweden, that part I know from Swedish history, Swedish politics rather, how a legitimate concern of Sweden, the Ministry of Education, in 2000, about the lack of knowledge about the Holocaust in high schools in Sweden and elsewhere, And that's a legitimate concern. It's an important concern. Children should not underestimate the importance of what happened, even the Swedish role in what happened. Well, let's not open it now, I guess. The way Israel took over that campaign and turned it into a campaign that says, we're not doing it so the children in Sweden would not forget what happened in the Holocaust. We're doing it, the children in Sweden would understand that if you don't support Israel, you deny the Holocaust. And that's the kind of thing that is much important. I wouldn't fight against the importance of Holocaust memory in Europe. I think we should, it's an important part of European memory. And not every nation has still come to terms with its own role in the Holocaust, including this nation. And therefore that's important. But we have to show how it is being manipulated to provide immunity for Israel. That is what is important for us right now. You know, first of all, losing some family members is not a bad thing. I have some cousins and nephews who don't talk to me, and I thank God that I chose Palestine. That was the only way to stop our dialogue. But seriously speaking, I know, I agree, the grassroots is as important as politics from above. And we all have, it's amazing, we all have similar problems in sections of the society that are marginalized economically and socially and are led by right-wing and fascist ideology to blame it on others rather than on governments. People who were brought up in a certain Christian theological or Jewish theological kind of environment, kind of challenging both basic hatred that is incited on the one hand and indoctrination that is very deep is a huge challenge. But again, I'm thinking, as I said before, there's a limit and there is a priority. You have to decide, do you go to every worker or you go to the unions of workers? Do you give up on talking to the government, as difficult as it may be, or maybe you are overcoming your reluctance to talk to politicians and you still talk to them because it might help, or mainstream media. And you have all these tactics that we're familiar with. I know that even in Sweden, when you go to the mainstream media, if they tell you, the first question they ask, you condemn Hamas. I always refuse to answer this question in the BBC. I never answered that question. I said, let's first ask you, the BBC, do you condemn the genocide in Gaza? And they don't know how exactly. We can have tactics to reach mainstream media and so on. Again, as I say, if people are willing to go to a book club, you are in a very good position. But I really don't have a magical formula there. I just think that effort should be in all directions, including grassroots. But as I said before, we need to strategize internationally, globally. We need a better structure, a better organization to make the numbers that we already have count. It's a good question. I tried in my book to imagine, because it's very difficult. On the one hand, I think I have one inhibition, maybe because I was born in Israel and so on. Although I know historically that decolonization can be a very violent, militarized armed affair, because I connected to the people there. I wish it would not be the scenario, but I take it into account. That's why I'm such a great supporter of BDS pressure, because I think that the more we will succeed in achieving it by sanctions and pressure, the less need will there be, hopefully, for violence to change the reality. So the book, that's the weakness of the book. It's not It's not parade on scenes of killing people in order to get liberated, and I apologize for that. But yes, it does have a very important section of the strategic change by the 48 Arabs. Their decision not to play anymore in the political game in Israel, to be part of the efforts that I try to imagine to reunite the Palestinians under either a new organization or revised PLO. I do believe that the Arab world, if it will change, even if it doesn't go to a conventional war, it can threaten a conventional war. I mean, all these things are partly done with the hope that such things can work. With total knowledge of maybe it's all very delicate. But yes, I really do believe it. And it's good that you mentioned it, and because I think that the group that is the most interesting in that respect, is thinking about the future, not its role in the liberation, but thinking about the future, are the 48 Arabs. They are the only Palestinians who probably know Israeli Jews, not necessarily only as settlers and soldiers. They have professors who are Jewish, they have students who are Jewish. Despite they're fully aware of the apartheid system and the oppression and so on, but on a daily basis, there is more interaction between the two communities, which is very different from any other interaction Israelis have with any other Palestinian group, let's say in the West Bank, or even East Jerusalem, definitely, Rasa. It depends what you do with that unique Palestinian experience. Do you bring it to the Palestinian liberation movement, or do you continue to do what they've done up to now? You bring it to the Israeli Jewish society with the hope that they would change because we are the Palestinians who can talk. I do hope that their strategy would change. In the book, I believe it's a very important factor. Do they join an arms struggle? Do they join a less violent movement? This is something really the Palestinian national movement itself will decide. And I think also depends very much on the regional and international community. This I know from history. If the region in the international community thinks that is the benefit for everyone to de-Zionize Palestine, it can be done without violence. But if they don't think, violence will continue and also succeed. But it would be far longer with huge, as we've seen in the last 2 years, huge victims, not on which mostly would be the beginning of these Palestinians. So we have to be aware of it as humanists as well as ardent supporters of the Palestinian right for freedom, justice, and liberation.